September 16, 1990, and the town of Santa Fe, New Mexico was celebrating the annual Fiestas de Santa Fe, a multi-day celebration featuring parades, mariachi music, food vendors, and activities that drew tens of thousands of visitors to the historic downtown plaza. The plaza was packed with families enjoying the festivities, with stages featuring performers, booths selling traditional crafts, and the smell of green chile and tamales filling the warm afternoon air. Lucas Moreno was 8 years old that Sunday afternoon, a boy with thick black hair that fell across his forehead, dark brown eyes, a small scar above his right eyebrow from a bicycle accident, and an energetic personality that made him constantly move and explore. He wore dark blue jeans with reinforced knees, a bright yellow t-shirt with New Mexico Zia symbol across the front, red and white Nike high tops that lit up when he walked, and he carried a small canvas bag with his allowance money to buy treats. Lucas had come to the fiestas with his mother, Elena Moreno, a single parent who worked as a nurse at St. Vincent Hospital, and his younger sister Sophia, who was 5, and they'd been enjoying the celebration since arriving at noon. At approximately 2:45 p.m., they were watching a folklorico dance performance on the main stage in the plaza, and Elena was holding Sophia on her hip while Lucas stood beside them, captivated by the colorful dancers. The performance was energetic and loud with dozens of dancers in traditional costumes, and the crowd of approximately 500 people was pressed close to the stage area to get better views. At 2:52 p.m., Sophia said she needed to use the bathroom urgently, and Elena told Lucas to stay exactly where he was standing while she took Sophia to the portable toilets about 30 yards away. "Don't move from this spot. I can see you from the bathrooms," Elena instructed, and Lucas nodded while remaining focused on the dancers, and Elena could see his yellow shirt clearly as she walked with Sophia toward the facilities. The portable toilet line was long with approximately 15 people waiting, and Elena stood in line with Sophia while keeping her eyes on Lucas's position near the stage. At 3:05 p.m., after waiting approximately 13 minutes, Elena reached the front of the line and took Sophia into the portable toilet, a process that took about 2 minutes. When Elena emerged at 3:07 p.m. and looked back toward the stage where she'd left Lucas, the dance performance had ended, and the crowd was dispersing, and she couldn't see Lucas's yellow shirt anywhere in the area. Elena rushed back to the spot where Lucas had been standing, calling his name and asking people if they'd seen an 8-year-old boy in a yellow Zia shirt, but the crowd was moving in different directions and nobody recalled seeing him. Within 3 minutes, Elena was frantically searching the plaza area, and she asked festival security to make announcements over the loudspeaker system requesting Lucas Moreno to come to the information booth. By 3:15 p.m., dozens of festival attendees were helping search, and Santa Fe police had been called about a missing child at the fiestas, and officers arrived to coordinate an organized search effort. In approximately 15 minutes, while his mother took his sister to the bathroom keeping visual line of sight most of the time, 8-year-old Lucas Moreno vanished from a crowded plaza during a festival celebration. If you want to hear how DNA finally solved this 34-year mystery, make sure you're subscribed, hit that like button, and comment where you're watching from. Now let's continue. Santa Fe police arrived at 3:20 p.m., and Officer David Martinez immediately organized a systematic search of the plaza and surrounding streets while obtaining detailed descriptions of Lucas from Elena. The bright yellow Zia t-shirt became the most distinctive identifying feature, along with the light-up sneakers and the small scar above Lucas's right eyebrow that would be visible up close. The area where Lucas had been standing during the dance performance was examined, and investigators interviewed people who'd been near that location, but nobody recalled seeing an 8-year-old leave or being led away by anyone. The end of the dance performance had created natural crowd movement as hundreds of people dispersed toward food vendors and other stages, and investigators theorized Lucas might have been swept up in that movement. Elena was interviewed about whether Lucas would have wandered off on his own to explore or buy food with his allowance money, and she insisted he was obedient and wouldn't have left the spot where she'd told him to stay. The small canvas bag Lucas had been carrying with approximately $8 in coins and bills was never found, suggesting he'd had it with him when he disappeared, or whoever took him had taken the bag as well. By evening, over 200 volunteers were searching Santa Fe's downtown area and surrounding neighborhoods, checking businesses, parking lots, and any location where an 8-year-old might have wandered or been taken. The Fiestas de Santa Fe continued, But attendance dropped significantly as word spread about the missing child, and many families left early feeling unsafe with a child predator potentially operating in the crowd. Bloodhounds arrived from Albuquerque by 5 p.m. and tracked Lucas's scent from where he'd been standing near the stage, and the dogs followed a trail through the dispersing crowd toward the edge of the plaza. The scent trail led to a side street about 50 yards from the stage area where vehicles had been parked, and the bloodhounds lost the trail completely at that location, suggesting Lucas had been placed in a car. Detective Robert Chen arrived at 6 p.m. and immediately focused on the 15-minute window when Elena had been in the bathroom line and then inside the portable toilet with Sophia. 13 minutes in line where you could see Lucas, then 2 minutes inside where you couldn't, Chen confirmed with Elena. So the actual window where Lucas was completely out of your sight was approximately 2 minutes. This narrow time frame suggested either extraordinary timing by an opportunistic predator or someone who'd been watching the Moreno family and had waited for exactly this kind of opportunity. FBI was contacted given the potential for child abduction from a large public event, and Special Agent Catherine Wells arrived from Albuquerque with resources and experience from similar cases. Agent Wells theorized that someone had been observing Lucas and had seen Elena leave with Sophia, then had approached Lucas during the 2 minutes when his mother was in the bathroom. An 8-year-old told to stay in one spot might follow an adult who claimed his mother sent them to get him, or who said there was an emergency with his sister, Wells explained. The end of the dance performance creating crowd movement would have provided cover for someone leading Lucas away, as hundreds of people were moving simultaneously in various directions. By Monday morning, the case had become major news across New Mexico and neighboring states, with Lucas's photo appearing on television showing his dark hair and gap-toothed smile, and the distinctive yellow Zia t-shirt was emphasized repeatedly. Tips flooded in from people claiming to have seen Lucas at various locations, but every reported sighting was investigated and found to be other dark-haired boys with similar features. One potentially significant tip came from a vendor who reported seeing a man talking to a boy in a yellow shirt near the plaza's edge around 3 p.m., but the description was vague, and the vendor hadn't paid close attention. This witness described the man as Hispanic, approximately 40 to 50 years old, wearing jeans and a dark cowboy hat, but couldn't provide more specific details about facial features or build. The description was so generic it could match thousands of men who'd been at the fiestas that Sunday, and attempts to create a composite sketch produced an image that generated hundreds of tips but no viable suspects. Surveillance cameras at businesses around the plaza were checked, but in 1990, camera coverage was extremely limited, and the few cameras that existed captured only building entrances rather than the crowded plaza area. By late September, the intensive daily search operations had been scaled back after 2 weeks produced no trace of Lucas, despite thousands of volunteer hours and extensive professional investigation. Elena quit her nursing job to focus entirely on searching for Lucas, and she appeared regularly on local television pleading for his return and asking anyone with information to come forward. Lucas is a sweet boy who loves mariachi music and playing soccer, Elena said through tears. If someone has him, please let him come home, or please tell us where he is so we can bring him back. The case was featured on Unsolved Mysteries in early 1991, and the broadcast generated thousands of tips. But as with everything else, each lead was investigated and found to be mistaken identity or well-meaning but inaccurate information. Detective Chen investigated registered sex offenders who'd been in Santa Fe during the fiestas, and several were located and interviewed, but none matched the vague witness description or raised specific suspicions. One person who drew attention was Raymond Silva, a 52-year-old man who lived in Santa Fe and had been convicted of child molestation in 1982, serving 6 years before being released in 1988. Silva worked as a construction contractor and was known to attend local festivals and events, and neighbors reported he often wore cowboy hats and Western clothing. But when investigators interviewed Silva, he claimed he'd been at the fiestas with his adult daughter and grandchildren, and the daughter confirmed they'd been together the entire afternoon. By 2000, 10 years after Lucas's disappearance, the case had essentially gone cold with periodic reviews, but no active investigation, and Lucas Moreno became another child who'd vanished from a crowded public event. Elena never remarried and never had other children beyond Sophia, unable to move forward from September 16, 1990, when she'd taken her eyes off Lucas for 2 minutes and had lost him forever. Age progression photos were created showing what Lucas might look like at 13, 18, 25, 35, and these images were distributed through missing persons databases as years passed. Detective James Morrison took over cold cases in 2010, and he was troubled by how little physical evidence existed beyond witness statements that had led nowhere and the bloodhound trail to the side street. Morrison used modern databases to search for adults who might match Lucas's age and general description, but had questionable origin stories or gaps in their early childhood documentation. By 2020, Lucas would have been 38 years old, and Elena held memorial masses each September 16th at the Cathedral Basilica of St. Francis, praying for her son and lighting candles in his memory. True crime podcasts discovered Lucas's case in the early 2020s, and several shows featured episodes about the Santa Fe Fiesta's disappearance and the 2-minute bathroom break that had changed everything. Raymond Silva, who'd been investigated in 1990, died in 2018 at age 80, without ever being charged in connection with Lucas's disappearance, though he'd remained a person of interest throughout his life. In April 2024, a construction crew demolishing an old house in a rural area 20 miles south of Santa Fe discovered human remains buried beneath a concrete slab in the basement. The house had belonged to Raymond Silva, who'd sold it in 2015 when he'd moved to assisted living, and the new owners had purchased it intending to tear it down and rebuild. Santa Fe police were called immediately, and Detective Sarah Chen from the cold case unit arrived to investigate what appeared to be human remains that had been concealed for many years. The remains were carefully excavated and transported to the State Forensic Laboratory, and preliminary examination confirmed they were a child approximately 8 to 10 years old, who'd been deceased for approximately 3 decades. Scattered near the remains were fragments of fabric including what appeared to be yellow material, with traces of turquoise coloring that could have been from a Zia symbol design. DNA testing was immediately ordered, and investigators compared the remains against genetic samples that Elena Moreno had provided to databases when the technology became available in the late 1990s. The DNA analysis took 12 weeks, and when results came back in July 2024, they showed a 99.97% probability that the remains were Lucas Moreno, missing since September 1990 from Santa Fe. The confirmation devastated Elena and Sophia, who learned that Lucas had been dead for 34 years, buried beneath Raymond Silva's house just 20 miles from where they'd been living and searching. Detective Chen's investigation revealed that Silva's alibi from September 16, 1990, had never been thoroughly verified, and his daughter admitted in 2024 that her father had actually left the fiestas alone around 3 p.m. that day. "My father told me to lie and say we'd been together all day," Silva's daughter confessed, "and I was afraid of him, so I did what he said. But I've carried guilt about it for 34 years, knowing I might have prevented justice." The daughter explained that Silva had returned to the fiestas around 4 p.m., seeming agitated and nervous, and later that evening he'd done concrete work in his basement, which she'd thought was odd timing but hadn't questioned. Chen theorized that Silva had been at the fiestas watching for vulnerable children, had seen Lucas standing alone when the dance performance ended, and had approached him claiming Elena had sent him. Lucas, told to stay in that spot and thinking an adult was helping him find his mother, would have followed Silva willingly through the crowd to where Silva had parked his truck on the side street. Silva had likely taken Lucas to his house, and based on the medical examiner's findings, Lucas had died from asphyxiation within hours of the abduction, possibly during an assault. Silva had buried Lucas's body in his basement and had poured concrete over it that same night, creating a tomb that remained undiscovered for 34 years until the house was demolished. The revelation that Raymond Silva had been responsible for Lucas's death devastated Elena and Sophia, and they struggled with the knowledge that Silva had lived freely for 28 years after killing Lucas before dying peacefully in assisted living. Detective Chen held a press conference in August 2024, announcing that Lucas Moreno's disappearance had been solved through DNA, that he'd been murdered by Raymond Silva, and that Silva had died before facing justice. The announcement brought closure to a case that had haunted Santa Fe for 34 years, though the knowledge that Silva had never been prosecuted and had lived a full life after killing Lucas was bitterly painful. Elena attended the press conference and spoke about the 34 years she'd spent searching for Lucas, never knowing he'd been buried just 20 miles away beneath Silva's basement floor. I drove past Raymond Silva's house hundreds of times over the years, Elena said through tears. I was searching everywhere for Lucas, putting up flyers and talking to anyone who'd listen, and my son was buried right there the whole time. The fact that Silva's daughter had lied about his alibi in 1990 was particularly troubling, and prosecutors considered charging her with obstruction of justice, but ultimately decided against it, given the time that had passed. Silva's daughter apologized publicly to Elena and Sofia, explaining that she'd been terrified of her father, and had been conditioned to obey him without question throughout her childhood. I'm sorry I didn't tell the truth in 1990, she said. I was 24 years old and still afraid of my father, and I've spent 34 years knowing my lie might have kept Lucas from being found, and I'll carry that guilt forever. The case brought renewed attention to how alibis provided by family members should be thoroughly investigated, and how fear of abusers can lead witnesses to lie even in serious criminal investigations. New Mexico passed legislation in 2024 requiring that alibis in child abduction cases be independently verified, rather than relying solely on family member statements, reforms known as Lucas's Law. Elena established the Lucas Moreno Foundation, supporting families of murdered children, providing resources for investigations, DNA testing, and the emotional support needed to survive devastating losses. The foundation also funded training for law enforcement on thoroughly vetting alibis and recognizing when witnesses might be lying due to fear or coercion from suspects. Lucas was buried in September 2024 beside his grandmother who died in 2015, in a ceremony attended by over 300 people who'd known Lucas or had been touched by his story. Elena spoke at the service about finally being able to lay Lucas to rest properly after 34 years, and about the bittersweet nature of having answers, but no justice. I wanted Lucas to come home, Elena said, and he did come home, but not the way I'd prayed for all those years, and the man who took him from me never faced consequences, and that's something I struggle with every day. Sofia, now 39 years old and a social worker helping trauma survivors, read a letter she'd written to the brother she barely remembered but whose absence had defined her entire life. I don't have clear memories of you, Lucas, Sofia read, but I grew up in the shadow of your disappearance and Mom's grief, and the knowledge that something terrible had happened, and now I finally know the truth, and I can say goodbye properly. The yellow Zia t-shirt fragments found with Lucas's remains were preserved as evidence, and Elena kept a replica of the shirt in a shadow box at home as a reminder of the last day they'd had together. The Santa Fe Plaza where Lucas had disappeared was updated with better security measures, including comprehensive surveillance camera coverage and protocols for immediate response to missing children reports. The case proved that predators like Raymond Silva can successfully hide crimes for decades, dying before being held accountable, but that physical evidence can still provide answers to families who've searched for years. It demonstrated the importance of thoroughly investigating alibis even when provided by family members, as fear and coercion can lead witnesses to lie in ways that obstruct justice, and it showed that demolition and construction projects can reveal evidence of long-hidden crimes, bringing closure to families, even when justice is no longer possible. Elena lived to see Lucas found and to bury him properly, though the knowledge that Silva had never been prosecuted haunted her remaining years. By late 2024, 34 years after Lucas Moreno vanished from the Santa Fe fiestas, his case stood as a reminder that some predators successfully hide their crimes and die free, but that truth still matters to families seeking closure. Detective Chen continued investigating Raymond Silva's background and discovered evidence suggesting Lucas might not have been his only victim, though proving connections to other cases remained difficult decades later. Silva's former home was thoroughly searched, and ground-penetrating radar was used to scan the property for additional burial sites, but no other remains were found. However, investigators identified 3 unsolved child disappearances from northern New Mexico between 1985 and 1995 that occurred during events Silva was known to have attended, raising disturbing questions. Chen worked with cold case units in other jurisdictions to compare evidence and timelines, but without Silva alive to question, and with limited physical evidence, definitively connecting him to additional crimes proved impossible. Elena became a vocal advocate for stronger sex offender monitoring and community notification laws, testifying before the New Mexico legislature about how Silva had been allowed to live freely after his 1988 release. Raymond Silva was convicted of child molestation in 1982, Elena told lawmakers. He served 6 years and was released, and just 2 years later, he murdered my son, and the system failed to protect Lucas and other children. The reforms Elena advocated helped strengthen New Mexico's sex offender registry requirements and enhanced monitoring of high-risk offenders after release from prison. Sophia dedicated her social work career to helping families of missing children, using her own experience with Lucas's disappearance to provide understanding and support others couldn't offer. "I know what it's like to grow up with a missing sibling," Sophia told clients. "I know the uncertainty and the grief that never fully resolves, and now I know what it's like to finally get answers after decades, and I can help others navigate these experiences." The Lucas Moreno Foundation funded DNA testing for numerous cold cases, and within its first year, it facilitated the identification of 4 other missing children whose remains had been found but not identified. The Santa Fe fiestas continued annually, but organizers implemented comprehensive security measures including missing child alert systems, surveillance cameras, and trained personnel monitoring for suspicious behavior. Elena attended the fiestas each September to honor Lucas, standing in the plaza near where he'd last been seen, and speaking to families about the importance of constant vigilance. "I looked away for 2 minutes, Elena told parents. "Just 2 minutes to take my daughter to the bathroom, and someone was watching and waiting for exactly that opportunity. So please don't think it can't happen to you." Raymond Silva's daughter established a scholarship fund in Lucas's name, attempting to make amends for her 1990 lie that had helped her father avoid justice for decades. "I can't undo what I did," she told Elena, "but I can try to honor Lucas's memory and help other children have opportunities he never got, and I hope someday you might be able to forgive me." Elena struggled with forgiveness toward Silva's daughter, understanding intellectually that she'd been a victim of her father's control, but emotionally unable to fully absolve her for the lie that had protected a child killer. The case proved that family members can be complicit in covering up crimes through fear or loyalty, and that investigators must independently verify alibis rather than accepting them at face value. It demonstrated that concrete and construction can conceal evidence for decades, but that eventual demolition and development can reveal crimes that seemed perfectly hidden. And it showed that dying before facing justice doesn't mean perpetrators succeeded in escaping responsibility, as truth eventually emerges and names are permanently associated with evil acts. Lucas's story became part of training materials for law enforcement across New Mexico, used to teach investigators about the importance of thorough alibi verification and persistent cold case investigation. The bright yellow Zia t-shirt that had made Lucas so visible in the crowd became symbolic of the case, representing how even distinctive features and watchful parents can't always prevent determined predators. Elena died in 2028 at age 72, 4 years after Lucas was found, and she died knowing what had happened to her son even though his killer had never faced justice. Her obituary mentioned that she was predeceased by her son Lucas, whose murder had defined her life and whose memory she'd honored through decades of advocacy. Sophia inherited the foundation's leadership and continued Elena's work, ensuring that Lucas's legacy would be protecting other children and supporting families navigating the unique trauma of losing children to violence. The case of Lucas Moreno stands as a reminder that 8-year-olds should be safe standing in plaza crowds while mothers take siblings to bathrooms, that 2 minutes is enough time for predators to act, and that DNA can solve decades-old mysteries. It proves that truth matters even when justice is impossible, that families deserve answers regardless of how much time passes, and that cold cases should never be closed as long as evidence exists to be discovered. And in Santa Fe, where a boy in a yellow Zia shirt once watched dancers before being taken by a predator who'd been watching and waiting, Lucas's memory endures through reforms that protect other children. The small canvas bag Lucas had been carrying with his allowance money was never found, presumably discarded by Silva after the murder, but Elena had kept an identical bag as a reminder of her son. Detective Chen continues reviewing unsolved child disappearances from the 1980s and 1990s, looking for connections to Raymond Silva that might provide closure to other families still searching. "Silva is dead and can't be prosecuted," Chen stated. "But if we can prove he was responsible for other cases, those families deserve to know the truth just like the Morenos did. and that's worth pursuing even without the possibility of justice. The story reminds us that predators can hide among us for decades, that family members' alibis should be verified, and that construction projects can reveal crimes buried long ago. And it demonstrates that even when killers die free, their names can still be attached to their crimes, and their victims can still be found and honored and remembered as more than just missing statistics. Lucas Moreno, taken during a 2-minute bathroom break at a festival celebration, is finally home beside his grandmother. His story a tragic reminder that evil watches and waits, but that truth eventually emerges even from beneath concrete floors.